Hi, my name's Joe Gooch and this is my video response to BBC One's Panorama programme GM Food Cultivating Fear, shown on BBC One at 8:30 PM on Monday the 8th of June 2015. I'm going to be showing some clips. Excuse the lagging behind subtitles, but that's how it was recorded. Hopefully they can sort subtitles out better on topical programs which are shown as live. You know, maybe use a stenographer rather than voice recognition software, but that's another story. So let's have a look.
A new generation of genetically modified crops is emerging from the labs to reignite the arguments around GM food.
It's certainly not a dangerous technology. It's about the most benign technology I can imagine.
So, is this GM's game-changing crop?
It dispels the myth that GM is some kind of ogre which is going to destroy agriculture as we know it.
But organisations which oppose GM insist there's still plenty to fear.
We can't give any kind of blanket assurance that GM foods are safe to eat.
Yet one of their former leaders breaks ranks for the first time to say they're wrong.
It is, in my view, unacceptable, morally unacceptable, to stand out against these new technologies.
So, are groups which oppose GM right to be worried, or are they feeding the fear?
Well, straight away we can see this is going to be a very biased documentary in favour of GMO, and it's interesting how, rather than talking about the science, immediately they're talking about this as a moral question, how it's immoral not to use this technology, like companies such as Monsanto are on some moral crusade to help the poor of the world, which, if you Google Monsanto, is clearly ridiculous. 22,000 people die each day due to malnutrition, and companies such as Monsanto and others could do a lot more to help global hunger, rather than getting poor farmers to use their GM seeds.
Brinjal is the local name for aubergine. BT signifies a gene has been inserted into the plant. Hafizur is one of 108 farmers growing them as part of a government project. The aim of BT Brinjal is to cut pesticide use and boost the yield. Hafizur used to spray chemicals twice a week to protect his crop. It's expensive and bad for the farmer.
Right, well, they're showing a farmer here, Hafizur, who's growing this BT Brinjal, a genetically modified aubergine, and they're saying the main problem is he was spraying pesticides, which obviously were affecting him badly.
When I used the pesticide, my condition was very bad because of the pesticide. Most of the time I felt a burning sensation in my body. My eyes were irritated, my head was spinning around. I used to feel very weak.
Hafizur has stopped using pesticides against the caterpillar, though still sprays for other pests.
But he still sprays for other pests, so he's still using pesticides.
The BT gene enables the plant to make a toxin from microbes present naturally in the soil that kills the caterpillar.
So this genetically modified aubergine, this BT Brinjal, creates a toxin inside the aubergine or brinjal, which kills the caterpillar. So how can this be a good idea? How can this be healthy? How can this be good for ultimately the people who eat the brinjal? To be eating something which has been genetically modified to kill a living creature that feeds on it.
It may also help farmers who overuse pesticides without adequate protection.
Surely, if Monsanto and his groups want to help these farmers, give them adequate protection. Obviously there's a case for organic farming, of course, which you'll see an organic farmer in a little while.
Dr. Robed Amin works at the biggest hospital in the capital, Dhaka. He says thousands of farmers who suffer from the effects of pesticides never see a doctor.
Yeah, apparently it's okay to grow a pesticide within the vegetable you're going to eat. I can't see, the two don't really, you can't have one, you can't say pesticides are bad on one side, and yet you want to grow pesticides within the very vegetable you're going to eat, and that's fine. It doesn't make any sense to me.
So what do you think about a new variety of brinjal which uses nearly no pesticide.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, if the brinjals is modified in such a way that less amount of pesticide is needed, or very less, that would be wonderful.
Now, Tom Heap has just said, what do you think about a new variety of brinjal which uses almost no pesticides? Well, that's complete contradiction to what he said earlier about the farmer who was still having to use pesticides on other pests which weren't that specific caterpillar. So he's getting what they're doing here is he's getting a response from a medical professional, in this case Dr. Robid Armin, but he's not giving him all the information to make an informed response.
Author and campaigner Mark Linus fought against GM for 2 decades, and then this.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, I want to start with some apologies which I
It was a change of heart with the passion of a convert.
For the record, I want to apologise for having spent several years ripping up GM crops.
Now we go on to Mark Linus, who they were saying he was a spokesman against GM, and now he's had this, revelation, and he's had this conversion. But looking into him, he was more of a climate campaigner rather than GM campaigning. So I don't know why they're. Obviously, it suits this documentary to highlight him because the slant of this documentary is saying GM is fine. So here's someone who was against it, but now he's for it. So it's just yet another tactic to say, oh yeah, GM's fine. Yeah, get it down your neck.
Mark says his opinion changed when he decided there was no logic in accepting the scientific consensus on climate change while dismissing it on GM.
Well, that makes sense. That's scientific, isn't it? Everyone's agreeing on this, so I might as well agree with them on everything else as well. Yeah, very scientific, mate.
The Bt gene has been added to corn eaten in the US for almost 20 years. Mark now believes there are great benefits in GM.
This has enormous international significance because this is the first genetically modified food crop anywhere in the developing world to actually be in the hands of farmers and to be in the markets, and people are now eating it. I mean, so in many ways this is a global first.
The trial is backed by US aid money and America's Cornell University.
Right, this GM test, they're saying, is backed by government grant and Cornell University. Cornell University has been granted $5.6 million by the Bill Gates Foundation, who are very pro-GMO. They have shares in Monsanto. So this isn't some sort of independent study. This is being paid for by supporters of GMO to do this study. Mark Linus is a fellow of Cornell University, which has been paid this $5.6 million. That's interesting. Don't mention that on this documentary. I wonder why.
That's why.
But on this organic farm, they are not convinced. Farida Akhtar favours planting wild versions of brinjal, which don't attract the fruit and shoot borer pest, so don't need the GM cure.
So why can't more of this wild type of brinjal be grown, rather than a type that needs to be genetically modified, making billions and billions of pounds of profit for these major corporations who are apparently doing it for humanitarian purposes?
And GM seed is making the seed toxic. They are saying that with this seed it will die. Huh? Okay, and so if it dies in the brinjal, when I eat the brinjal, why don't you think that it is toxic for me as well?
Farida Akhtar makes a great point here. She says if this brinjal has a toxicity inside it which kills the worm, the caterpillar inside it, what makes you think that toxicity isn't going to affect me when I eat it? To which Tom Heap replies, rather patronisingly,
Because you're not a fruit and shoot borer, you're a human being.
GM is a method whereby you can add genes to a plant and thus confer some improvements in the properties of that plant. I like to use the analogy of a smartphone. So if you download some apps to it, well, then you've got some added functionality on your smartphone. It's pretty hard to envisage how you could do something dangerous by doing that. Most of these things are utterly benign.
So now we've got Professor Jonathan Jones at the Sainsbury Laboratory in Norwich talking about GM and it being fine. I can't see any problems with it. Interesting, Jonathan Jones is also a founder of the GM patent holding company Mendel Biotechnology. Interesting, I don't mention that in this documentary either.
Most GM plants in the ground have been adapted to survive a dousing with this chemical glyphosate herbicide, meaning the weeds in the field are killed, but the crop survives.
Oh, as Tom Heap says, these GM crops have been designed to withstand glyphosate, which is a weed killer, which the World Health Organization has said is probably carcinogenic to humans. And after it's been sprayed on GM crops, has been detected in food supplies, it's been detected in soil, in water supplies and in the air. So something that's being said by the World Health Organization is probably carcinogenic to humans is being transferred all around the area where GM crops are.
They've been eating them in America for close to 20 years, probably billions of meals. Famously litigious society, no one's brought a case saying it damaged their health.
So Tom Heap is saying, well, you know, for 20 years billions of meals have been eaten in America with GM in and no one's brought any lawsuits. Like, oh well, yeah, that's fine, yeah, great point. Well, cancer rates have been soaring in the past 20 years, and in the next 20 years they're expected to surge 57% according to the World Health Organization. GM crops need glyphosate weed killer, which the World Health Organization is saying is probably carcinogenic to humans, and cancer rates are soaring and expected to soar even further. Connection?
I mean, there will be people who have an absolute purist view that 1 grain in a billion is too many. But what I can say is there's no scientific justification for taking that view. They might see it as an ethical position on which they're not prepared to compromise.
You're talking of ethics. He's a founder of a GM patent holding company, Mendel Biotech, and yet he hasn't disclosed that in his documentary. So where are his ethics in being forthright and honest and open?
And are you truly free and independent of the big agri-tech companies, or are you in the pocket of Monsanto?
You see, the Bt brinjal gene, it was given by Cornell University. They are not agri-tech company.
Right, Tom Heap's just asked the Bangladeshi agricultural minister if they're in the pocket of Monsanto. And she said, oh no, this was given to us by Cornell University, which has got funding from the Gates Foundation, which have shares in Monsanto.
This is part of a sort of corporate push to make GM acceptable.
Well, it's not corporate, it's the government and it's American universities.
Again, Mark Linus, who's a fellow of Cornell University, which is getting funding from the Gates Foundation and Monsanto, is saying, oh, this isn't part of a corporate push, it's a university, which he's a fellow of, which has connections with Monsanto, as I've said. So this is pure deception. If they believe so strongly in GM, why don't they be honest about their connections? Why are they being shady about them? Why hasn't he said that he's a fellow of this university which is getting funding by the GM companies? However, you know, it's not really indirectly, is it? From the Gates Foundation, which have shares in Monsanto. So why don't they be upfront about that? This is far from independent. This is far from some humanitarian cause from Monsanto. But yet Mark Linus, he doesn't mention this at all, does he?
But Jonathan Jones' last GM potato went to America. British know-how going abroad.
We essentially have a broken market regulatory system here. In fact, the regulatory system itself is okay, but then once the European Food Safety Agency say it's safe, it then goes to the Council of Ministers and the Commission, and you get politics.
So we've got Tom Heap just saying, oh yeah, British know-how has gone abroad now because we didn't use this GM potato. From Jonathan Jones, who's founder of this GM patent holding company. Yeah, well, I mean, obviously he wants it to come to Britain because he will benefit financially from it coming to Britain. But yeah, they don't mention that, do they? He's just shown as a scientist who's developed something in this country and he's had to sell it abroad because we wouldn't accept GM potato over here. Yeah, he's benefiting financially from this. He's a founder of this GM patent holding company.
And it's already in our food chain. Since 2013, most of Britain's supermarkets have allowed their suppliers to give genetically modified animal feed to poultry and meat we consume.
So that's a bit of a concern. If you're a meat eater, then if you eat any meat from a supermarket, you're already eating meat that has come from animals that have been fed on genetically modified feed. I don't know how many people are aware of that.
I think there is a big danger that we can inadvertently export our views to other countries who cannot afford the luxury of having the views that we do, because I don't go to bed hungry at night. If we don't use GM, then the consequences for them are quite dire, when GM could offer them a means of sustainable agriculture.
Right, so they're basically ending this documentary by saying we can't solve world hunger unless we have genetically modified farms, basically, in the poorer countries. But that's not the point. The reason there's world hunger is to do with the way food is grown and sold on the world markets, rather than feeding the local populations in the countries that grow these foods. They're growing these foods to sell on the world market, to selling to us, selling to the Western world, selling all over the world. And it's been revealed that half of the world's food is thrown away. So we could easily feed the world. It's just the way we live is not sustainable, and yet we want to solve world hunger. This kind of sort of shows what's wrong with our whole sort of Western ideology, our way of thinking, and the way we live, the way we treat this planet and the people on the planet. We could feed the world easily. There's more than enough food to go around. The fact that half of the world's food is wasted shows that. There's 22,000 people a day die through malnutrition, and yet we're throwing half of the world's food away. So we don't need GM crops to feed the world. We could do that already, but yet we don't. And it's just, like I say, it shows our Western the problems with our whole ideology, in that the way we want to solve a problem, which we could solve, is by selling poor people seeds to grow GM crops, which just happen to make these companies like Monsanto trillions of dollars and pounds in profits. It's just our way of solving world hunger is to exploit the hungry yet again, and I think that's outrageous. So, GM food needed to solve world hunger? That's a lie. So, I mean, you can look all this stuff up yourself on the internet. Look it up, do your own research. But I think this Panorama documentary is full of lies, deception, and lack of transparency in the connections between the people who are pro-GMO blatantly in this documentary and their links to biotech companies which they've either founded or getting funded by. And I think it's outrageous, and I think the BBC should address this. Thank you.